starting right here and right now, because this moment is your moment. It belongs to you.
Trump. One name, one man. A political hurricane reshaping the world again. Love him or loathe him, Donald J. Trump is back in the Oval Office, and his presidency is shaking up global politics like never before. But here's the real question. Which countries are actually cheering him on? Some are backing him for his bold economic moves, others for his no-nonsense foreign policy. But a few, their reasons will leave you shocked. So buckle up, because we're about to unveil the 10 countries standing strongest behind Trump in 2025, and trust me, some of these names will blow your mind. Before we dive in, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and drop your guesses in the comments. Let's see if you can predict them all. Now, let's get started. First up, we head south to the land of carnival and questionable political decisions. Brazil, the land of samba, soccer, and, whether you love it or not, political chaos. But one thing is clear, Trump still has a fan base here. You see, Trump's relationship with Brazil didn't end when he left office the first time. In fact, it only grew stronger. During Trump's previous administration, one of his biggest international admirers was Jair Bolsonaro, Brazil's former president. Dubbed the Trump of the Tropics, Bolsonaro mirrored Trump's every move, from his hard stance on immigration to his rejection of climate change agreements. He even borrowed Trump's favorite tactic, branding the media as the enemy. But here's where it gets interesting. Bolsonaro may be out of power, but the movement he sparked, that's still alive and well. Lucas, a 38-year-old farmer from Mato Grosso. He grew up in a struggling rural town where government regulations made it nearly impossible for small businesses to survive. Then, Bolsonaro came in with a pro-business approach, cutting environmental restrictions and opening up trade. And who did Bolsonaro credit for inspiring these policies? Donald Trump. Trump showed the world that a strong leader doesn't bow to global elites, Lucas says, and Bolsonaro followed in his footsteps. We need leaders like them who put their own people first. Even after Bolsonaro's defeat, Lucas and millions like him still hold on to the same ideals, and Trump remains a symbol of defiance against the global establishment. Even with a more left-handing president in office now, Brazil's conservative movement hasn't gone anywhere. Pro-Trump rallies have popped up across the country, fueled by a deep belief in strong borders, economic nationalism, and a distrust of international organizations like the UN. And let's not forget social values. Many conservative Brazilians align with Trump's views on family, religion, and gender roles. They see his leadership as a blueprint for resisting progressive policies that they feel threaten traditional values. But how long will this last? The real question is, will Brazil's love affair with Trumpism survive the test of time? With shifting political landscapes and global pressures, Brazil's relationship with Trump could go either way. But for now, one thing is certain. Trump's influence in Brazil is far from over. So what do you think? Is Brazil's loyalty to Trump a lasting alliance or just a temporary fling? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget, hit that like button and subscribe for more eye-opening content. Next, we're jetting off to the Middle East. When you hear Middle East, you probably think of oil, ancient history, and some of the world's most intense conflicts. But there's one name that sparks just as much debate in this region as anywhere else: Donald J. Trump. In some parts of the Middle East, Trump is seen as a champion of strong leadership, a man who doesn't play by the usual diplomatic rulebook. In others, he's viewed as reckless, someone who makes big moves without worrying about the fallout. But if there's one country where Trump's impact is still felt in 2025, it's Israel. No one can talk about Trump's relationship with Israel without mentioning his decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. When he moved the US embassy there in 2018, it was a game changer, a moment that thrilled many Israelis while infuriating Palestinians and much of the Arab world. For Yael, a 65-year-old shop owner in Jerusalem, that moment was unforgettable. I remember the day they raised the American flag over the embassy, she says, a mix of pride and nostalgia in her voice. For us, it was a sign that someone in the White House truly saw us. Trump understood what many others ignored. For Israelis like Yael, Trump wasn't just another US president, he was a leader who took decisive action, regardless of global backlash. But not everyone in Israel sees Trump as a hero. While right-wing Israelis and settler communities still see him as their strongest ally, others worry about the long-term consequences of his unpredictable leadership. During his presidency, Trump pulled the US out of the Iran nuclear deal, calling it the worst deal ever negotiated. To Israel's conservative factions, this was a bold stand against Iran's growing influence. But to Israeli security officials, it was a ticking time bomb, one that could escalate tensions instead of reducing them. He gave us what we wanted in the short term, says Omer, a political analyst in Tel Aviv, but he also left us in a more uncertain future. And that's the contradiction. Trump was loved for his bold support of Israel, but his tendency to act without consulting allies left even his supporters nervous. Where does Trump stand in 2025? Even though Trump is back in office, Israel's view of him remains split. His conservative supporters still see him as a fearless protector, a man who never wavered in his support for the Jewish state. But others see him as a high-risk, high-reward leader, someone whose policies come with unpredictable consequences. But one thing is for sure, Trump's presence in Israel's political memory is permanent. What happens next? The bigger question isn't whether Israelis still admire Trump, it's whether his policies will actually help Israel in the long run. So what do you think? Was Trump's approach to the Middle East brilliant or reckless? Drop a comment below. Now let's hop over to Europe. If there's one country in Europe where Trump's name still carries serious weight, it's Poland. While many European leaders openly clashed with Trump over his views on NATO, climate change, and globalism, Poland saw something different, a leader who spoke their language, literally and politically. To understand Poland's admiration for Trump, you have to understand Poland itself. This is a country that has been through centuries of war, occupation, and political upheaval. Independence and national pride are everything here. And Trump? Well, he represented those same ideals, a nationalist who wasn't afraid to stand alone. For Poland's conservative government, Trump's policies were not just policies, they were a symbol of strength. His tough stance on Russia, perfect for a country that has always feared its massive eastern neighbor. His rejection of liberal globalist ideals, exactly what Poland's ruling Law and Justice Party, PIS, wanted to hear. And for some Poles, Trump wasn't just an American president, he was a political hero. Meet Tomasz, a 52-year-old businessman from Warsaw. He remembers the Cold War. He remembers when Poland wasn't free. And to him, Trump was the first American president who truly understood Poland's struggles. Obama was weak on Russia. The European Union tells us what to do. Trump, he said what needed to be said. He protected NATO. He stood up to Putin. He made Poland feel safe. Tomasz isn't alone in his thinking. Many in Poland still see Trump as the only US president who took their security seriously. In 2019, Trump even stationed more American troops in Poland, a move that made headlines across the country. We didn't trust Biden, Tomasz says, we trust Trump. But trust comes with fear. Many Poles worry that without Trump in power, Poland is vulnerable again. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 only made those fears worse. Poland knows what it's like to be invaded, and many believe Trump's aggressive stance on NATO was the only thing keeping Russia in check. But not all Poles are on board with the Trump love affair. The country is deeply divided. Younger, more progressive Poles see Trump as a disaster, someone who encouraged division, nationalism, and isolation. Trump's America was chaotic, says Katarzyna, a university student in Krakow. We need allies. We need unity, not someone who wants to break everything apart. For Poland, the question is clear. Is Trump's vision of the world one that truly benefits them? Trump's policies still have strong influence in Poland, but as Europe shifts toward new challenges, the question is whether Poland's loyalty to Trump will help or hurt them in the long run. What do you think? Is Trump still the best thing for Poland, or is it time for them to move on? Drop a comment below. Let's talk about the Philippines. From the neon-lit streets of Manila to the quiet fishing villages along the coast, Donald Trump's name still sparks conversation in the Philippines, and not always in the way you'd expect. This isn't just about politics, it's about power, fear, and admiration. Why do many Filipinos still support Trump? To understand this, you need to look back at Rodrigo Duterte, the former president of the Philippines. A man who, like Trump, didn't care for political correctness, didn't trust the media, and thrived on controversy. Trump and Duterte didn't just get along, they saw the world through the same lens. Tough on crime, even if it meant blood on the streets. A deep disdain for the press and political opponents. When Trump praised Duterte's war on drugs, calling it an unbelievable job despite global outrage, many Filipinos saw it as validation. Trump wasn't condemning Duterte, he was celebrating him. And for millions of Filipinos who believed Duterte was cleaning up their country, Trump's approval meant everything. Meet Carlos, a 41-year-old tricycle driver in Manila. He's lived through corrupt presidents, crime-ridden streets, and broken promises from politicians who talked big but delivered little. Duterte made us feel safe, he says. And Trump? He understood that. He wasn't like the other American presidents who lectured us about human rights. He respected us. Carlos remembers the nights when drug dealers and criminals were rounded up, sometimes disappearing without a trace. He remembers how the streets changed, how the fear shifted from citizens fearing crime to criminals fearing the government. Not everyone liked it, but we slept better at night. For people like Carlos, Trump's approval of Duterte was proof that their leader was doing the right thing. But not everyone agrees. Human rights groups, journalists, and many younger Filipinos saw Duterte's rule as a reign of terror. They saw Trump's support as a green light for brutality. Trump and Duterte didn't care about human rights, says Maria, a university student in Cebu. They only cared about power, about being feared. That's not leadership. And yet, even with Duterte out of office, Trump's influence lingers. Many Filipinos still see him as a leader who values strength over diplomacy, action over words. What's next? As Trump makes his return to the White House, his supporters in the Philippines are watching. Will he continue to back leaders who rule with an iron fist? Or will he shift tactics in a world that's grown more unstable since his last presidency? One thing's for sure, Filipinos haven't forgotten him. Now here's the question. Do you think strong leadership means sacrificing human rights? Or is there a way to have both? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you're new here, subscribe because the next country on this list will blow your mind. Let's take a quick dive into Hungary. Imagine walking through the streets of Budapest, past grand castles and Gothic cathedrals, only to realize something eerie. Democracy itself feels like it's wearing a slowly tightening leash. At the center of it all, Viktor Orban, Hungary's iron-fisted leader, a man who's been steering his country away from Western liberalism and straight into a political playbook that feels all too familiar. If you think Trump's influence ended at America's borders, think again. In Hungary, Trumpism isn't just an ideology, it's a strategy, a weapon, a template for holding on to power. Orban and Trump have long shared a mutual admiration, and for good reason. They both frame themselves as fighters against the so-called globalist elites. They claim to be the last true defenders of their nation's identity, sovereignty, and cultural purity. And most importantly, they thrive on chaos, because when people feel overwhelmed, they look for strong leaders to take control. Orban didn't just take a page from Trump's book, he practically rewrote it in Hungarian. His crackdown on press freedom, his war against immigrants, his attacks on political opposition, these are the same tactics Trump attempted but couldn't fully execute. But in Hungary, there's less resistance. The European Union grumbles, the opposition protests, but Orban tightens his grip anyway, just like Trump tried to do in America. And let's talk about loyalty. When Trump was in office, Orban was one of the few European leaders who outright endorsed him. While others kept their distance, Orban doubled down, calling Trump's leadership the best thing that happened to the world. That's not just political strategy, that's a full-blown alliance. But here's where things get complicated. Not everyone in Hungary is on board with this bromance. Many Hungarians feel trapped between an increasingly autocratic government and a European Union that's growing tired of Orban's defiance. They see their country slipping away bit by bit as democracy erodes in favor of one-man rule. Take Adam, a young journalist in Budapest. He grew up believing in free speech, in the power of the press. But under Orban, media outlets that criticize the government mysteriously shut down. He's watched his colleagues lose their jobs, their voices, even their freedom. It's like watching history repeat itself, he says, and nobody is stopping it. For many Hungarians, Trump's continued influence isn't just a political talking point, it's a daily reality. The question isn't whether Hungary still supports Trump. The real question is, how much of Trump's playbook will Orban use before Hungary fully abandons democracy? So, what do you think? Is Hungary a warning sign of what happens when leaders go unchecked? Or do you believe strong leadership requires tough decisions? Let us know in the comments. India. Picture this: 1,000,000 people packed into the world's largest cricket stadium, chanting, cheering, waving American and Indian flags. The scene? Trump's 2020 visit to India, an event so grand it felt less like a diplomatic engagement and more like a rock concert. The message was clear: Trump and India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi were putting on a show of unity. But behind the grand speeches, the hugs, and the flashy optics, the relationship between Trump and India has always been a complex, unpredictable dance, sometimes in sync, sometimes on the verge of stepping on each other's toes. Trump viewed India as a strategic counterweight to China, and for good reason. India's economy was booming, its military influence was expanding, and its rivalry with China made it a valuable ally. Trump seized this opportunity, offering military cooperation, arms deals, and diplomatic support, but always with a catch. His approach was transactional, his loyalty only as strong as the last deal signed. One moment, he was calling India a true friend. The next, he was slapping tariffs on Indian goods, accusing the country of taking advantage of the US economy. This whiplash diplomacy left India walking a tightrope, accepting Trump's support when beneficial, but bracing for his unpredictability. Narendra Modi and Donald Trump share more than just a love for large crowds and fiery speeches. Both built their political empires on nationalism, anti-elitism, and a promise to revive their nation's former glory. Their leadership styles mirrored each other, strong, polarizing, and unwavering in their belief that they alone had the vision to lead. Modi, much like Trump, has been accused of eroding democratic institutions, silencing dissent, and stoking religious tensions. And in Trump, Modi found a leader who didn't lecture him on human rights or democracy, something previous US presidents had done. Instead, Trump embraced the spectacle, praised Modi's governance, and avoided uncomfortable topics like India's treatment of minorities. But here's the twist. While Modi enjoyed the Trump era, India as a whole never fully trusted Trump. His erratic behavior, his America Nurse trade policies, and his restrictions on H-1B visas, which directly hurt Indian workers, made him a controversial figure. Unlike in Poland or Hungary, where Trumpism is a dominant force, India's support for Trump has always been conditional. Fast forward to 2025. Modi still leads India, China remains the region's biggest threat, and Trump, once again in power, is recalibrating America's global alliances. But does India still see Trump as a reliable partner? For every Indian nationalist who admires Trump's hardline stance on China, there's a business leader wary of his protectionist policies. For every Modi supporter who sees Trump as a fellow fighter against the liberal elite, there's an IT professional frustrated by Trump's immigration policies. India is playing the long game. Modi will shake hands, sign deals, and smile for the cameras, but if Trump falters, India won't hesitate to look elsewhere for alliances. Now here's the real question. Is India truly aligned with Trump's vision, or is this just a marriage of convenience? Will India continue to support Trump in the years to come, or will his unpredictable nature drive them away? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button, because trust me, the next country on this list, you won't believe who's backing Trump now. Okay, let's talk Saudi Arabia. In the world of global politics, there are no friendships, only interests. And when it comes to Saudi Arabia and Donald Trump, those interests were worth billions of dollars, a strategic alliance, and a whole lot of controversy. Let's rewind to 2017. Trump's first international trip as president wasn't to a European ally or a neighboring country, it was to Saudi Arabia. There, under golden chandeliers and the watchful eye of Middle Eastern royalty, Trump sealed the biggest arms deal in US history, $110 billion in weapons. The message was loud and clear: we do business here. While past US presidents at least pretended to care about human rights and democracy, Trump didn't bother. He saw the Saudis for what they were, a cash-rich, oil-drenched powerhouse that could help him push back against Iran and boost US arms sales. And the Saudis? They saw in Trump a leader who wouldn't ask questions. When journalist Jamal Khashoggi was murdered inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, the world was outraged. The CIA concluded that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, ordered the killing. Political leaders across the world condemned the act, vowing consequences. And Trump, he shrugged. He publicly dismissed the intelligence report, saying, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Why? Because in his own words, they buy a lot from us. It was a chilling moment, a moment that proved something terrifying. If you have enough money, enough power, and enough oil, you can get away with almost anything. Now, in 2025, Trump is back in power and Saudi Arabia is still playing its high-stakes game. The Saudis continue to maintain strong ties with the US, keeping the flow of weapons, oil, and political influence alive. But here's the twist: Saudi Arabia is hedging its bets. MBS isn't just relying on Trump's America. He's also making deals with China and Russia. He's investing in a future where Saudi Arabia isn't dependent on just one superpower. While Trump still enjoys Saudi favor, he's no longer the only game in town. If there's one lesson to take from the relationship, it's this: money moves the world. Morality, justice, ethics, those are just decorations for the powerless. So, what do you think? Is Trump playing Saudi Arabia, or are they playing him? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The UAE? In the world of politics, some leaders chase headlines. Others quietly reshape history. The United Arab Emirates, under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed, MBZ, has always preferred the latter. While other nations took a wait-and-see approach to Trump's unconventional diplomacy, the UAE embraced it, not for the theatrics, but for the results. MBZ is a man who values action over words, and in Trump's business-like foreign policy, he saw something familiar: a transactional, no-nonsense approach to diplomacy. For the UAE, it wasn't about partisan loyalty or ideological alignment, it was about getting things done. And one of the biggest results of this approach? The Abraham Accords. Before 2020, the idea of Arab nations openly engaging with Israel felt like a distant dream, clouded by decades of hostility. But then, in a move that stunned the world, the UAE took a bold step, becoming the first Gulf state to normalize relations with Israel. It wasn't just a symbolic gesture, it was a carefully calculated decision, one rooted in economic opportunity, regional stability, and the hope for a more prosperous future. And Trump? He played the role of the deal maker, pushing past diplomatic red tape and orchestrating a peace agreement that had eluded world leaders for generations. Unlike previous administrations that saw the Middle East through a lens of endless conflict, Trump saw it as a marketplace, one where economic cooperation could replace animosity. And MBZ, a strategic thinker who had long wanted to modernize the region, was on board. I remember when the Abraham Accords were first announced. Like many, I was skeptical. Could this really last? Would old tensions resurface? But then I saw something that changed my perspective. A friend of mine, an entrepreneur from Dubai, was traveling to Tel Aviv for the first time. He wasn't a politician, just a businessman looking for new opportunities. Before the Accords, such a trip would have been unthinkable. But now he was making deals, shaking hands with Israelis, sharing coffee, and talking about the future, not as enemies, but as partners. He sent me a picture from a bustling market in Tel Aviv, "This," he wrote, "is what peace looks like." And that's when it hit me. The real impact of Trump's diplomacy wasn't just in political agreements. It was in moments like these. Moments where people who were once divided by history could now stand side by side, not as adversaries, but as collaborators. Fast forward to 2025, and it's no surprise that the UAE continues to support Trump. His transactional, results-driven diplomacy aligns with MBZ's vision of a stable, economically vibrant Middle East. Under Trump, the UAE saw a foreign policy that prioritized partnerships over prolonged conflicts, business over bureaucracy. In a world where many leaders get lost in ideology, Trump and MBZ shared a fundamental principle: the future belongs to those who build it. And for the UAE, that means making deals, not headlines. Now, let's uncover Japan. Diplomacy comes in many forms: firm handshakes, calculated smiles, carefully crafted statements. But between Donald Trump and former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, diplomacy looked a little different. It was golf swings, oversized trophy presentations, and yes, some truly awkward hugs. At first glance, their relationship seemed like an unlikely friendship. Abe, ever the polished statesman, and Trump, the brash businessman turned president. But beneath their differences, there was something deeper: a mutual skepticism of China, a desire to maintain a strong US-Japan alliance, and, perhaps most importantly, a genuine attempt to understand each other. It was no secret that Abe went out of his way to build a personal connection with Trump. He was the first world leader to meet Trump after the 2016 election, flying to New York before most had even figured out how to react to the news. Over the years, their bond played out on golf courses in both Japan and the US, with Abe strategically using Trump's love for the sport as a way to bridge political gaps. But despite the handshakes and photo ops, there was always an underlying tension, one that revolved around trade and security. Trump, with his America First mindset, pushed Japan to pay more for the US military presence in the region, an issue that made many in Tokyo uneasy. His tough stance on trade, slapping tariffs on Japanese goods, and demanding new agreements left Japan walking a tightrope, trying to maintain its crucial alliance with the US while not appearing too subservient. I remember watching one of their meetings, a press conference, where Abe stood beside Trump, nodding politely as Trump spoke about fair deals and stronger partnerships. I couldn't help but feel a mix of admiration and sympathy for Abe. He was doing what every leader must do, balancing national interests with personal diplomacy, trying to make sure Japan wasn't left behind in Trump's unpredictable world of deal-making. In a strange way, their relationship reminded me of a friendship I once had. A close friend, charismatic and bold, always set the tone in our conversations. He had a way of pushing people, sometimes making demands that felt a little too one-sided. And yet, despite the challenges, I valued that friendship. Why? Because at the end of the day, there was mutual respect. He challenged me to think differently, and in turn, I grounded him when he got too carried away. That's how I see Japan's relationship with Trump. It wasn't always comfortable, and at times it was downright awkward, but Japan understood something crucial. Trump's leadership wasn't just about words, it was about action. And for all the tension, Japan knew it had to stay engaged, to keep the alliance strong even when the path forward felt uncertain. Now, in 2025, Japan remains wary but watchful. Trump's return to power brings back both the benefits and the challenges of his leadership. Security in the Pacific remains a pressing issue, and Japan knows that, awkward hugs and all, its relationship with the US is still one of its most important. Like any good golf game, Japan knows that patience, precision, and a willingness to adapt are the keys to staying in the game, and as history has shown, they've mastered that art well. What does Russia hold? For years, the relationship between Donald Trump and Russia has been shrouded in controversy, speculation, and a whole lot of political theater. From whispers of election meddling to Trump's reluctance to criticize Vladimir Putin, US-Russia relations during his presidency were anything but ordinary. Even in 2025, the shadow of those years still looms large. But let's be real. Russia's interest in Trump isn't about loyalty or admiration, it's about strategy. Putin, a master of political chess, saw in Trump a US president who disrupted the traditional playbook. Trump's America First approach, his skepticism toward NATO, and his focus on direct deal-making rather than multilateral diplomacy all worked in Russia's favor. Unlike past US presidents who took a hard-line stance against Moscow, Trump's relationship with Putin was built on an odd dynamic, one that blurred the lines between respect, pragmatism, and controversy. The world watched as Trump publicly sided with Putin over US intelligence agencies in Helsinki, a moment that still defines their relationship in the minds of many. Critics saw weakness, but supporters saw an attempt at a new kind of diplomacy. Even after leaving office, Trump's legacy continues to shape US-Russia discussions. While the Biden administration reinstated a tougher stance, many Russian officials quietly expressed hope that Trump's return could mean a shift back to a more transactional, less confrontational approach. But in today's world, where Ukraine remains at the center of global tensions, nothing is certain. I once had a friend, not a close one, but someone I interacted with often. He was charming, unpredictable, and always knew how to keep people guessing. At times he was helpful, making things easier when our interests aligned. But deep down, I always knew one thing: he wasn't someone I could truly trust. Our conversations were filled with unspoken agendas. And while we were never outright enemies, there was always a game being played. That's exactly how I see Russia's relationship with Trump. It was never about friendship or loyalty, it was about opportunity. Russia saw Trump as someone who disrupted the system, someone they could maneuver around or even use to their advantage. And Trump, he saw Russia as just another player in the grand game of global power. As 2025 unfolds, the big question remains, will Russia continue to support Trump, or has the dynamic changed? With tensions in Eastern Europe at an all-time high and global alliances shifting, even Putin may be reconsidering his next move. One thing is certain: whether you believe Trump was tough on Russia or too soft, the effects of his presidency are still being felt. And that, my friends, wraps up our deep dive into the 10 countries still drawn to Trumpism. The world is watching, the stakes are high, and the future is anything but predictable. Missed a part of the truth? Click the link below to catch up, because staying informed is the only way to stay ahead. Otherwise, well, let's just say history has a way of repeating itself. Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay skeptical.